Over the years of budgeting and managing my own money, I've come across a few key indicators of growth in my situation. Now, I make it a point to monitor those indicators on a regular basis. Tracking these specific indicators helps me quickly gauge if I am making progress or trailing behind. And that information allows me to know if I should keep doing what I'm doing or switch things up. In this episode, I'm sharing the 6 things I monitor in my money situation and why they make a difference for me. Feel free to take any of these things that I monitor and apply them to your own situation. Hey there, I'm Raya Reeves, and over a decade ago, I turned my life around through budgeting. I went from being an overspender deep in credit card debt to being the founder and full-time money coach of City Girl Savings. Now, I help women work towards their dream life and tap into their financial power one budget at a time. I fully believe you can live a life you love with a budget, and I'm living proof. The weekly City Girl Savings podcast focuses on the intersection of money and the City Girl lifestyle. Join me every week along with some special guests as I share my experiences, advice, and guidance on navigating life and money as an experience-loving millennial. All right, the first thing I monitor in my money situation is, drum roll please, my budget. I feel like you probably knew this would be on the list, and you're not surprised this is literally at the top of the list. A budget is the number one tool for financial success for myself and everyone else. So with that being said, I have actually been monitoring my budget since my early 20s when I would map out my paychecks on my work computer at my first job out of college. It was actually then that I had colleagues asking me like what I was doing and how I was mapping out my money. And that time in my life really gave me the idea of helping people with budget plans. But that's a story for another day. Thankfully, my process now is much more streamlined. Now, I always end the month with a review of what happened throughout the month, but I also use that time to set my budget for the next month. So I kind of want to work a little bit backwards. I set my budget for the next month on the last day of the previous month. So, for example, if it is July 31st, I will be creating my budget for August. So I always spend this time prepping my budget for the month ahead. And I just simply copy and paste my budget template and make any changes that would apply to that month. So for example, if I know that I have events, travel, holidays, birthdays, I will make sure to adjust those budget categories accordingly for that month. And this really gives me a good idea of how I plan to spend my money for the month. And if it's going to be a spend heavy month, maybe I can do things to make sure I bring in more money to accommodate. So that is how I start the month with my budget. But throughout the month, I am looking at my budget because I track my spending. This is something that I'll talk about in a little bit because it's another thing that I monitor in my situation. But because I'm tracking my spending on a regular basis, I'm looking at my budget 1 to 2, maybe even more times a week. So my budget is constantly in front of me and I'm constantly aware of what I should be doing with my money for the month. And then at the end of the month, I close out my budget. So I kind of started with this because I really set my budget up for the next month on the last day of the month, but also on the last day of the month, I close out my budget for the current month. I take the time to assess how well I did with my money, if I was on track with my spending, if I made more, if there were any budget categories that I went over or under, and ultimately if I succeeded with sticking to my budget. I think the main thing for me is, did I have more money coming in than going out? So meaning, was I profitable? And as long as that's a yes, I really feel good, even if certain spending categories were over budget. So after that, I start the process all over again for the next month. So I really have this routine on autopilot, and it's actually the routine that I help my clients with as well. So the next thing I monitor in my money situation is my spending. So I just touched on this with the budget explanation, but taking it almost a step further. There is no other way to really know if you're sticking to your budget than by monitoring your spending. If you are not tracking your spending, if you are not looking at your spending, you don't really know if you're sticking to the budget. And because of this fact, not only do I help my clients create routines around tracking their spending, but I have that same routine myself. So, as I mentioned, I am looking at my budget multiple times a week because I'm tracking my spending on a very regular cadence, typically every 2 to 3 days, unless there's just a lot of spending happening, then I track more frequently. I just want to put out there, if you don't budget, if you don't track your spending, I am going to link to my one-on-one money and budget coaching program in the show notes. I want you to check it out because it will be a game changer for you. But getting back on track with this thing that I monitor in my money situation, like I mentioned, I track my spending pretty much every day. If there's not much activity happening, I'll go 2 to 3 days. If there's a lot of activity happening, I'm tracking daily. Now, I will say that on the days that I don't spend, obviously there's nothing to track, so I don't really need to do anything there. But when I travel out of town, I'm usually not tracking my spending every day. I have gotten to a point in my life where I am good with managing my money. So I will take vacations and have budgets to spend. So I'm not concerned with myself if I don't track regularly when I'm on vacation. If you are the type of person that tends to overspend, or you haven't gotten to a place where you're fully confident in your abilities to control your spending, I would highly recommend tracking every day when you're on vacation or out of town. Obviously, I don't want you to make your entire trip revolve around what you're spending or not spending, but I think if you can find a cadence of tracking every other day while you're on vacation, this will help you level set with yourself and make sure that your spending is under control. And if it's not, at least you know, and then you can rein it in. But as I mentioned earlier, I look at my budget as I track my spending. I am identifying which budget categories are over under budget, or if I'm trending on track with my budget. And this, like I mentioned before, helps me identify if I need to keep doing certain things or start doing things differently throughout the month with my spending. It also helps me identify if I need more money to offset the extra spending. So, for example, one of my budget categories is dining out, and I give myself $250 a month for that. That includes like iced coffees, things like that. So, if we are midway through the month and I have already spent $200 on dining out and iced coffee, that tells me that I am trending over budget, and I can use that information to take it down a notch and reduce my spending for the remaining weeks of the month. I track my spending on an Excel spreadsheet, and I create a new tab for each month. And I have data going back as far as 2016. Every now and then, I like to just go back through the old tabs and see what I was doing with my money in the past. It's such a confidence boost because I am confidently making more than I was way back then, and I am confidently more controlling my spending than I was back then. I wasn't terrible, but you do this more and more, and you just get better and better, and it's nice to see that change over time. Are you loving this episode so far? Well, the money and life level up conversations never end in the City Girl Savings community. Visit citygirlsavings.com for instant access to resources that help you budget, level up your money mindset, and so much more. And make sure you stay up to date with CGS by following us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, all at City Girl Savings. All right, the next thing that I monitor in my money situation is my account balances. So I check in on my primary spending accounts daily. Some of the other accounts I may check a few times a week, but because I track my spending every 1 to 2 to 3 days, it makes sense that I'm monitoring my account balances as I reference my account activity to track my spending. But looking at my accounts actually helps me make sure everything is going according to plan. On occasion, I'll have an annual expense come out that maybe I forgot about or didn't remember the due date, but because I have a sinking fund for annual expenses, I can just transfer that money over to offset that big expense that I had maybe forgot about. Now, monitoring my account balances also notifies me if unexpected income comes in or anything that I had forgot about in terms of income. So sometimes one-off deposits, like maybe dividend income quarterly, will hit my account. And then I'll make sure to add that income into my budget and plan for it accordingly. I speak with a lot of people, usually before they start working with me, who don't check their accounts. And they don't check either out of fear or anxiety that looking can create. And if that's you, I want you to know that you have to look, you have to face the music. You cannot fix a problem you don't know exists. So if you ignore your accounts, you may be causing more damage than if you just look and see that you don't have money to spend. If you need help with working through that fear and anxiety, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Also, I want you to check out episode 129, Budgeting Multiple Six Figures with City Girl Savings client Rachel. Rachel would hate to look at her accounts, but now she is free from that stress. So I'll make sure to link to it in the show notes. Now, one final piece I want to add about this thing that I monitor is that at the end of every month, I actually track the balances of all my accounts. So, as I mentioned, I'm checking my primary accounts really daily because I track my spending, but I track the balance and status of all accounts on the last day of the month. And this helps me as I track my net worth, which leads me into the next thing I monitor in my money situation, my net worth. On the last day of every month, I track my net worth. So I have a spreadsheet that lists all of my asset accounts by category. So checking account balances, savings account balances, investment account balances, IRA balance, and City Girl savings account balances, and the value of all my properties. The spreadsheet also lists out all of my liability accounts, or otherwise known as debts. So, credit card balances, City Girl savings debt balances, auto loan, mortgages. Because I don't carry balances on any of my cards and my card is paid off, those categories are usually zeroed out. But I do have a mortgage that I split with my boyfriend. So, half of that balance is listed. With that information, so all of my asset balances and my debt balances, I have a formula that subtracts the liabilities from the assets, and then it shows me my net worth. I also have a view on my spreadsheet that tracks the growth or loss of net worth from the previous month and the percent change. So, for example, if my net worth was less this month than it was last month, I'll see that it's red and I'll see by how much it went down. If it went up, it's green and I see how much it went up by. And then I also see the percent change of that. So if it went down by 1%, I see that. If it went up by 5%, I see that. I always like to see my net worth trending up. I mean, who wouldn't, right? But even if it goes up by 1%, I am happy. But I will admit there are periods when it goes down. And that's usually when the stock market is not performing well. When the stock market doesn't perform well, I'll definitely notice my net worth go down. It is what it is, right? Like I don't plan on doing anything differently. That happens in the stock market. You have to just ride the waves. So similar to my tracking, I actually keep previous month's data of my net worth and look back on it from time to time. I'm so proud to say my net worth is the highest it's ever been, and I only expect and plan for it to continue going up. The next thing I monitor in my money situation is my savings contributions and my savings goal progress. So I usually set annual savings goals, and I like to break those goals into monthly and quarterly milestones, which makes tracking a bit easier. And if you've been listening to this podcast, you know that as of the past couple of years, I actually do mid-year check-ins on the progress of those goals. So let me give you an example of an annual goal that I break into milestones. I, for 2024, have a goal of contributing $7,000 to my Roth IRA. So basically maxing it out, which comes out to $583 a month or $1,750 a quarter. So having those kind of targets in my mind lets me know that, hey, if I save $583 a month or contribute $583 a month, I'm on track. If I can't do that, well, then if I can contribute 1750 in the quarter, I'm on track. Ultimately, as long as I hit 7,000 within the year, however I need to do that, that's the most important thing. But sometimes having those monthly and quarterly milestones makes a big difference. I also have sinking funds set up and I monitor my savings into those funds. So for example, I put 200 a month into a sinking fund for my semi-annual auto insurance premium renewal. These sinking fund contributions are actually included as a line item in my budget. So as I track my spending, I can quickly see if I made the transfer to savings or my sinking funds like I need to. Monitoring my savings contributions and goal progress just helps me assess if I'm on track with what I've set out to save during the year. Sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not, but knowing that information allows me to change course or do things differently or do the things that are working so that I can get as close to that goal as possible. And sometimes life happens, I don't reach my goals, and sometimes unexpected wins happen and I reach my goals faster than I expected. And I think the main thing is just keeping tabs on everything and doing my part to make sure I'm working towards reaching the goal. Alrighty, the final thing that I monitor in my money situation is my credit score. I want to just say that I'm very loose with this one. I don't have, weekly or biweekly or monthly check-ins on my credit score. This is not something that I monitor diligently. I'm very loose with it just because, first off, I don't have drastic changes in my credit, nor do I usually seek out additional credit lines, but I just like to always keep a pulse on where I stand with my credit. I will say that I do check this regularly because one time my score dropped drastically because my HOA company reported a late payment incorrectly. Had I not been looking at my credit score, I wouldn't have known and gotten it fixed quickly. So, monitoring my credit score, though I know it is something that shouldn't fluctuate often. If it does, I can take action and get it remediated rather quickly. Now, I don't use any like credit monitoring services like Credit Karma or Experian or anything like that, especially if they charge. But I do have a few credit cards that offer credit score monitoring for free. So I just refer to those. And usually it tells me exactly what I need to see. So there you have it. The 6 things that I monitor regularly in my money situation. Like I mentioned, feel free to take any of these things and start monitoring them in your situation. The more data you collect over time, the better you can see your progress and growth. Thank you so much for letting me be the money coach in your ear today. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the City Girl Savings Podcast and you feel empowered and motivated to take the next step in the journey to your dream life. Remember, if someone like me, a millennial who loves to travel, new experiences, and iced coffees can live a life they love on a budget, you can too.